Scrumban framework. Scrumban takes the best of both worlds from Scrum and Kanban and smashes them together into a hybrid framework that a lot of people refer to as Scrumban. This is a semi-structured framework that takes some of the elements of both of the other frameworks and puts them together. So let's just go over some of the base rules and functionality of Scrumban. Number one is you use the Kanban board for your visualization. The Kanban board is still a major piece to be able to visually identify your workflow and understand bottlenecks and where various work items are throughout the process. As well, you will also use the daily Scrum. So the daily Scrum, you're going to, again, have your project team in front of the Kanban board discussing what you worked on yesterday, what you're working on today, and any hurdles or obstacles that you're running into. You also go in and you pull the work rather than being assigned the work. So in Scrum, you are really assigned that work. Those work items are committed for that iteration, that sprint, and you're assigned to complete various tasks and various work items. But in Kanban, you're pulling that work. You're going in and saying, yes, I can accomplish that high priority task. You take ownership of it and move it into the doing column. And that is the same for Scrumban. You're actually pulling that work. You're going and deciding what work you should be accomplishing and moving and taking ownership of that. With that, as with Kanban, you need to have some strict work in progress or WIP limits. Because if you move all of your to-do items to in progress, that doesn't help anything. You get spread out just like you would in Kanban. So you have your strict work in progress limits just like you do in that Kanban framework. As well, like Kanban, the project team roles are really not clearly specified. In Scrum, you have the really structured team. You have your certain and specific roles on that team. In Kanban, you have really no titles. It's everybody is part of that collaborative team. With Scrumban, it goes more towards that Kanban side. It says, we don't need specific roles. You kind of form it with whatever roles fit your company. So this framework will help to mold to your current organization's structure. And then it also says that you will have more specialized team members. If you remember back to Scrum, we talked a little bit about cross-functional team members that can do a multitude of things that can help out in a lot of different areas. Well, that's not the case for Scrumban. Scrumban goes more of the Kanban side and says we're going to have specialized team members. If we need to do some design, we're going to go snag an architect and pull them as part of our team. We're going to go snag a developer and pull them as part of our team to help us achieve our various tasks or work items that are on the board. So that gives you a general overview of some of the things that Scrumban is known for. You're using the Kanban board to visualize the workflow. You still have your daily scrums. You pull your work rather than being assigned your work. You have work in progress limits that are set to help keep tasks moving, stop starting, and start finishing. You have your project teams that don't have any real specific roles. You kind of conform to the organizational roles. And you have your specialized team members rather than cross-functional team members, so you can get the right people on the team to help you complete those work items. Now, with Scrumban, the tricky part is you really could call any type of framework where you take pieces of Scrum and pieces of Kanban, you put them together, you could call them Scrumban. The definition is saying that you're taking pieces of both frameworks. So there gets to be some areas of contention or hot topics and discussions and debates in various groups. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about one of the biggest hot items and hot topics that are discussed and debated, and that is the idea of a time box or a sprint. Some people have the Scrumban being time boxed or utilizing set sprints. Other people say, no, we're going to use the fluidity of the Kanban framework, and we're just going to continue to move items from the to-do to doing to done and continue that process fluidly without any set breaks for a start and a finish of that particular segment or sprint. So what we're going to do is we're going to break down both if you would do more of a fluid and if you would do more of a time-boxed approach. So that way, regardless of the organization you end up working for, if they're using Scrumban or talking about it or considering it, you at least know that it could go either way. So let's start with the Scrumban option of the continuous flow, which matches more towards the Kanban side. So for those that are looking for the continuous flow, the big thing that they're being defined by is that there's a fluid movement of work. There's no time box. There isn't a set start, a set end. It's just work is continuing up until that project deadline or that project due date. You are going to pull items from that to do, and you're going to put them in that doing column. Again, same as Kanban. You're going to take from the to do, and you're going to take ownership of it and move it to the doing column for this continuous flow. You're also going to do your planning when your to-do list gets down to a certain number of work items. So you may have a rule that says, hey, when our to-do list is less than 5 work items, we need to plan additional to-do items, additional features and functionality that we're going to be building out as part of this project. You have that, so then it triggers that planning action, because when you're doing a continuous flow, you don't have those set starts and ends where you're really identifying that. So when you hit that certain number that you've set, then you go in, you plan, you add those additional user stories, work items to your Kanban board. And finally, with the continuous flow, you're going to utilize more of that lead and cycle time, which makes sense, right? You need to have a way to judge your performance, and if are you getting better, are there changes or bottlenecks or issues. And so with that lead and cycle time, you're able to track that task, that work item, from the creation all the way through the doing and the done. So those key metrics that we talked about in the Kanban section, those will play a big part if you're utilizing the continuous flow Scrumban. On the flip side, let's talk about the time-boxed Scrumban. This one's a little different because it utilizes sprints as a way to segment out that particular project. You're segmenting out pieces, so you have a set start and a set end with a particular kind of section of that project where you're able to initiate planning and reviews and retrospectives. So that sprint is generally between 1 and 4 weeks. For Scrumban, it's highly recommended that your sprint is 2 weeks long. 1 week is a little too short. You end up doing a lot of those planning reviews and retrospective meetings. If you start going 3 or 4 weeks, it's hard to really plan that far out, plan 3 weeks or a month worth of work. So 2 weeks is recommended. And as I alluded to, in the time box Scrumban, you are doing some of those Scrum type of structured meetings. You have your sprint planning meeting where you're going in, defining what you're committing to for that particular sprint. You have your sprint reviews where you're discussing how you guys performed in that sprint. Were there things that you were expecting to get done that you didn't get done? How did things work out compared to your estimates? That type of things. You're reviewing the sprint overall and discussing how things went. And then you're also doing the retrospective after every sprint, which is the team getting together and discussing how they can better work with each other. Are there bottlenecks or issues from a team standpoint that they can adjust? Are there additional resources that are needed? Are you able to release a resource that you no longer need? That type of thing. So you're doing a retrospective on the team for that particular sprint or for the project as a whole up to that point. Another key difference with the time box Scrumban is the Kanban board. So if you look at the Kanban board here, our to-do column, our to-do status has changed to backlog. It could also be to-do, it's just text, but a lot of teams change it to backlog because that's what they're used to. The backlog, or the old to-do column, is going to house those user stories and work items that maybe aren't quite fully fleshed out yet. We haven't gotten all the details on it. It might be an idea. We might be starting to talk with various users or stakeholders about what they need in that. And once enough analysis has been done, enough details are on that particular user story or work item, then it gets moved to the ready column. That means, hey, this is ready for work. We have enough details here for a solution to be created or a feature to be created for this particular work item. So items go in the backlog. They get moved to ready once it's deemed that there's enough information, and then it moves through the process like it would in any other Kanban type of framework. You move it from the ready to the doing once you're actually starting to work on it, that work in progress, and then on to the done. Teams will use that ready column a little bit differently. Some will load up that ready column with any backlog item that's ready to go. Other teams will flag various work items in that backlog saying that these are ready, and then they only move them to ready once they're committed to for a particular sprint. There's no right or wrong way. It's really up to your team and the structure and the processes that you use within your organization to help move that forward successfully. And then finally, with the Timebox Scrumban, you can utilize different metrics. So most of them that I see still utilize that lead and cycle time as their key metric, because that really gives you a good idea of the flow and it helps to identify those bottlenecks. I have seen some using burn down charts for this. I wouldn't recommend it as much, just because even if you're doing a Timebox Scrumban, you're still trying to keep this as fluid as possible. You're trying to keep this moving forward, and having that burn down chart, it's just hard, because do you do it based on the ready? Do you do it based on the backlog? How are you supposed to know? The backlog items don't have estimates, and it just gets really, really messy. I think most of the organizations that use burn down charts in the Scrumban are those that are coming from Scrum to Scrumban to try to get away from a little bit of that structure, and maybe burn down charts are just what everybody's used to on the projects, and so they continue to use it. But our recommendation is that you use lead and cycle times for your key metric for the Timebox Scrumban. The triage and feature freeze is utilized when the project deadline is approaching. You're getting close to the end of that project and you need to finalize what features you can get done, what work items you can get completed and done as part of that project. So what you do is the team and yourself, you go through and you identify what are those high priority tasks, what are those high priority tickets that need to be completed as part of this project. You obviously can work with users and other stakeholders to help determine that. Once you've got your list of which ones are the most important, you're going to freeze all other work. You guys are not going to start on anything else that's not deemed the top priority. What that allows you to do then is to focus your team's energy on those top priority items. You can swarm on those items, get them completed, get them done, get them tested, get them into the product before that project deadline happens. So just to let you know, Scrumban does use the triage and feature freeze, especially when you're doing the more continuous flow Scrumban. The last thing I want to talk about in regards to Scrumban is, what is the target organization? What organizations are utilizing Scrumban? There's really two types of organizations. Number one, the most common one that I see are organizations that adopt Agile. So they change from their waterfall or other framework into a structured framework such as Scrum. They utilize that framework for a number of years. They get very mature in it, very efficient with Scrum. And the structure, and while it helped at the beginning, the very structured nature of Scrum, it helped early on as they were adopting Agile and getting used to it. But now that they're a mature Agile organization, they don't want all that structure. They want to be able to adjust it to really conform to some of their organizational needs. So some of these companies will make the decision that they want to go to Kanban. They want to move from Scrumban to a more unstructured framework such as Kanban. Well, instead of making that leap, that's a big leap. That's like going from waterfall to Scrum, going from Scrum to Kanban. It's a big change as to how you do things. So what they'll do is they'll utilize Scrumban as a stepping stone, as a point to get to. Okay, let's get to Scrumban. Let's utilize that, because that's taking some of the elements from Scrum, some of the familiar stuff, adding some of the unfamiliar stuff like the Kanban board and some of the other pieces, and really can utilize Scrumban then to keep them moving forward as they get comfortable there, as they deem fit. They can then move from Scrumban to Kanban. The other type of organization, it could be like a newer organization that wants some structure, but maybe their industry or their organization is very specialized, and it's created in a way to really help them be successful. And they can't adopt Scrum because they can't change the roles and everything of their whole of their whole organization and all of their project teams to conform to the Scrum rules. So rather than upheave everything that they've done and potentially risk their organization or their organizational revenue, they will look to adopt Scrumban, which has some of that structure from Scrum with some of those benefits and features of the fluid motion from Kanban. So those are the two main type of organizations that I've seen go to Scrumban, but really any type of organization that's going to Agile could utilize Scrumban and utilize it successfully to move their projects forward.
So Jeremy, to summarize Scrumban, we're going to talk about what is Scrumban made out of. And to kick it off, I would say Scrumban is made up of Scrum and Kanban, just like
Hey, good hypothesis. I like it.
Yeah. So let's just revisit Scrum. So what is Scrum about? Simple framework.
Mm-hmm.
It is made up of cross-functional teams where they select a sprint and they plan on that sprint and then they deliver. And then they do the review and the retrospective at the end of the iteration. And one unique thing about Scrum is they have a daily stand-up and they have some Scrum artifacts.
Yep.
Right? So
yeah, very structured. Like
very structured.
Everything's set,
Uh-huh.
and that's how you do it.
There's a lot of prescription on how they can become agile, right? And when you look at Kanban, you visualize your work, you visualize your roadblocks, and you actually limit your work in progress, and you make explicit policies for your team on when does planning starts, when is the story ready, when does it get done, what is definition done. You get to decide as a team. So Kanban focuses a lot more on the pull-based and flow-based methodology.
Yes, and much more unstructured. Says, here's kind of the framework, but gives you some freedom to mold it to your organizational needs.
Yep.
Good.
Both of these are frameworks for doing Agile or following the Agile principle.
Sure.
And Scrumban actually takes the best of both of methodologies. So for example, from a Scrum, it takes the planning of Scrum. There's still some kind of planning. There's still some kind of time box or a sprint. And they can still do the reviews and retros. So that's what it comes from Scrum. And it gives a little bit more of a prescription on how they can still pay attention to being Agile. And from the Kanban, it takes the approach of pull-based system, where you're doing the planning, but it's more of a pull-based planning, and you can do that based on the length of your iteration and the complexity of the work that you have in that iteration.
Absolutely, and with Scrumban, they still use that Kanban board, so they give the visualization
100%.
of those work items, which is really important to teams. And I've seen the Scrumban get used a lot when companies are immature. They start their Scrum, right? They maybe start Agile for the first time. They develop their Scrum. They follow that real prescriptive approach and step by step. And here's rules you need to follow. And then they're like, you know what? We want to move. We're now mature. We've been doing this for a number of years, and we want something that we can mold a little bit more.
100%.
And so then they want to go to Kanban. But that jump from Scrum to Kanban is pretty drastic. That's a big leap. So they use Scrumban to really help them remove a little bit of structure, but keep a little bit of structure, and go to Kanban or Scrumban and work with that for a while before they eventually potentially move to full-on Kanban.